So are we starting?
I think yes. Nika, what do you think?
Yes,
Okay.
I think it's great. Let's start.
Yeah, okay. So welcome everyone to the third session in a chain of sessions where we're trying to unpack David Graeber's theory of value by reading around his essays and trying to look at turns and mental shifts that he's doing as informed by this conceptual apparatus. Last two sessions, we've been looking at David's relationship with fetishism, his look at the theory of African fetishes, and how it is really important to all of other works that he's doing. Today, we'll talk about some a little bit off topic. It is a different essay where he doesn't mention fetishism specifically, but we can see how the theory of value informs the challenges that he throws to other people in academia in this essay. So, okay, I would like to start by quickly summarizing the last two sessions where we discussed David's works on fetishism and social creativity. For the purposes of today's presentation, I would like to name three basic moves that describe the creation of social value through fetish. The first move is a collective investment. When a group of people comes together to negotiate some aspect of social reality and then pretend that the result of their negotiation is true, and they choose a material token to symbolize their agreement. The second move is a transformation of a symbol of value into the source of value. We see this when a material token chosen as a symbol of arrangement acquires the power to enforce this arrangement or to inspire people to show the behavior compliant with the arrangement. The third move is a role of violence in transforming the symbol of value into the source of value. In turning a playful, transient, pretend game into a concrete internal reality, in turning magic in a theology. In one of his essays, David said that provocation is one of the intellectual tools that can be used to spark the debate from which a richer understanding is likely to emerge. I think that turning the modes of productions inside out is an attempt on David's side to make a statement that makes sense from a certain point of view, but also so clashes with conventional understanding of reality that specifically the reality of world systems, schools of analysis, that it should inevitably spark a debate. I don't know if this piece was successful as a provocation. I haven't read any response by anyone else, but and couldn't find it. But I find it useful for the thesis that it uses as a payload. I find it illustrative of David's strategy of looking for anything that is treated as an eternal value because its origins were forgotten. To summarize the debate about modes of production, the term was first invented by Marx to describe how capitalism is different from not capitalism, and how not capitalisms are different from each other. The original category was meant to be understood as a relationship between the way how some people make things and the stories that other people use to take these things away. In practice, however, the way how things are made were never seen as a particularly important part of a relation. And if one focuses only on the stories that exploitators tell to justify their right to take stuff away, the entire category becomes identical with the state. The effect is that one cannot meaningfully apply such category mode of production analysis to the stateless or marketless society. So in 1960s, somewhere around, a group of theorists tried to fix the problems with mode of production by detaching it from a nation state. And I must say it was a very good move because looking at a nation state as a unit of analysis caused a lot of pain for attempt to understand the history. So this group is trying to detach from nation state, but the effect is that they change the category of mode of production in such a way that it loses all ability to describe the origin of capitalism. It then becomes possible to argue that capitalism has always existed in one form or another. So if the category was invented to describe how European feudalism turned into European capitalism and then projected to explain how everything was different from in slavery and in tribal modes and so on, then the moment they disconnected from the state, they lost ability to say that, well, capitalism started here or capitalism started here. It's like entire history is a capitalism, which a lot of capitalists embraced, and left people also embraced this angle. A lot of left embraced this angle, and David isn't happy about it. So his intervention is an attempt to fix the category of modern production in such a way that it would reacquire its ability to locate the origin of modern capitalism in 16th century Europe. His argument here is that the original mode of production category was used to look at production as a fashioning of material objects, which are then exchanged via market and then realized in households. David inverts this logic by looking at production as fashioning of human beings, who are then exchanged in the market and then realized in factories. Once he does this transformation, it becomes possible to apply modes of production analysis to discover capitalism even in stateless societies like Brazilian Kayapo, complete with production, exploitations, and tokens of value. But it also makes it possible to see how industrial capitalism in the 16th century Europe is different from all the other kinds and how it is radically different from what immediately preceded it in the European feudalism. The key aspect that makes modern capitalism to stand out is a systematic separation of homes and workplaces, with a transcendental veil of the market in between them. Humans who are produced at homes are being exchanged through the market and realized at workplaces. This is also very similar to the slave mode of production. So the modern capitalism mode of production in David's formulation is similar to slave mode of production in a sense that there is a transcendental veil between homes and workplaces in the same way as there is a veil between the continents where in slave mode of production, you have a continent where people are produced and then they are sold to the market, exchanged, and then brought to, for example, to American plantations to produce sugar. So this separation is the same, except in capitalism, this separation happens every day. You leave your house, go to the workplace, and all of the social reality is different the moment you step out of your household.
So, for example, if we start with separation of homes and workplaces and imagine a middle point between modern capitalism and full-on slave mode of production, it would be a situation when
people are taken from their homes on one continent, put to hard labor in another continent for 10, 20 years to grow sugar, only to then send back homes with a bushel of sugar for their effort. It's like, and then say, well, it's a free labor now if you give a bushel of sugar. So the reason why industrial capitalism finds a need to have people who change their status from slave to non-slave to enter and exit relationship of command every day is because permanent slaves can't buy any of the stuff they produce. And any mode of exchange that doesn't require buying and selling would undermine the market as a highest sphere of realization of value. So this would be my quick summary of the piece. And before I start going on all kind of tangents, does anyone want to ask for clarification or anything? Contribute? What?
Can I speak or it's yeah?
Go.
Yeah.
Go.
So I think the most interesting things about David, about his books, is that he, at least for me, when I first time find out about him, so I was like you, Stas, from the Soviet type of history school learning, where everything was described to us as this change of formation, but then so from feudalism to capitalism, from slavery to feudalism, and then to capitalism, and then very much the same was actually in the Western schools, and then yeah, David just destroy this logic, and that's last time we were talking also in the other group about Bushy Jobs, how Bushy Jobs was describing we are living in feudalism actually, very much, and we told us capitalism, but it is not. So that's understandable. Can you would be really interesting for me if you can again go through this fetish creation, collective creation, that will be like partially social creativity, but then this Marxist term about production fetishism, no, торговый фетишизм, как это называется?
Commodity fetishism. Yes,
Commodity
I was going to link it all back to commodity fetishism. Yes,
oh, yeah. Okay, cool. That's the. Mm-hmm.
This is exactly why I chose this piece to demonstrate how the fetishism can be seen behind the text. Yes, I do also come from evolutionary model, 3 or 4 or 6 stages of production. And David, like there are a lot of people basically abandoning this model. It's by now it is basically no one looks at it this way. David isn't just destroying it. He is showing how it made sense from the point of people who invented it. Not that just that it's wrong, but how it kind of how you can come to think that it's correct one. And this is a very special, I guess, training and mindset that he had of taking author. Like we talk in our modern age about death of author, but David was kind of reviving the authors and engaging with them on their terms to understand what's the fantasy inside the author that enabled him to believe in what he's writing. And that I find it very informative and like probably anthropological training does that. Okay, so how does it work with fetishism? First of all, the category that I'm interested in this topic is realization of value. What does it mean to say that value was realized? In Russian language, for example, I don't know if it matches on general English sphere. We say that, well, realization of a product is when it is sold, when like the factory produced it, put it in the store, and then store has inventory. The term when store has sold a product to the customers is realization, which is kind of strange because when that kind of implies that if it was sold, then it itself means the product had value. You produce a cake, you sell a cake. If you sold the cake, then it had value. Then your labor of producing had value. Doesn't matter if anyone had eaten it, actually, let alone enjoyed it. So a lot of examples in David's book about value circle around what it means to realize the value and how the value of anything is must necessarily go through realization phase. For example, if you have society where central value is seen to be putting food into children, then production of food, even though is seen to be a value, if you produced a lot of food, that itself isn't a value. It is only if you produce the food and put it in someone else's people, in other people, and preferably in children, only then your labor of producing the food retroactively is seen as acquiring value. If you if you grow old in Kayapo society and you have many children, then by the end of like when you grow old, you can realize this value by occupying a central stage and making some performances. If you make a lot of children and never actually step into the center, then your value is left unrealized. You create potential of value, but not the value. Hey, Gerald.
Hi, Stas. Is this the same as the concept, the comparison of exchange value and use value? Are we talking about the same value, use value?
That is a very good question. There is an affinity, but I wouldn't say that they're the same because use value and exchange value, at least popularized by Adam Smith, and there is a interesting shift that happens. Like they would, like the way Marcian tradition treats it, they are identical. And I think that David's arguments is that they are not really. That for Marx and for basically political economy, you have a place where things are produced, then the place where they are exchanged, and then when they are consumed. The action of consumption is identical with realization, kind of. Or at least you can say that by the time it consumed, the labor that produced this stuff already had value, or it even has value ahead of time. It's confused. So Marx does talk about realization, but from economical point of view, it does seem as realization and use are identical. And this is exactly the point to create distinction where our conventional understanding doesn't have this distinction between use and realization. So going back to Kayapo, for example, if you if the value of household labor of raising children is if you just raise a lot of children and never show up in the center stage, then no one else gets to acknowledge it. And the logic of realization for different purposes implies that it has to be realized in a larger domain where it's produced. So there is a kind of like hierarchy of values, and every next in a hierarchy, next level in hierarchy has to include the more people or more public domain, more universal domain. And the highest level has to be kind of like transcendental domain. The domain on top is seen as unchanging. For example, if you have, if you, I'm making it up right now, but just illustration. Say you have a society where you have some dead ancestral spirits, which are seen as the highest arbiters of your actions, and then you do something, and then you present this stuff to the spirits, and that is seen as a validation of your values. Realization happens when you sacrifice it to some certain spirits. The difference between spirits and the living people is that spirits are unchanging. They are transcendent. They do not degrade as normal human bodies, and it is necessary. Like David's logic is that it is necessary for someone to do the labor, continuously do the labor of maintaining this transcendent veil, of maintaining these spirits as constantly existing and transcending by doing the opposite with human bodies. So there are basically three topics already in my head, answering to three different angles. And I will try to go through all of them one by one. Next. Whose hand is next? I see the hand symbol, but I don't see who's holding it.
Nika, I think you were up next.
Okay, I think it's somebody who didn't speak yet. It's maybe not back. Not back.
Yeah. I was just going to say about realization. I think because we were talking about consumption and realization in like a market economy with like the example of the cake. And I think if I recall correctly, because I'm currently reading False Coin for the first time, but I think it's this argument that sort of in a capitalist economy, the collective social realization of value would be the actual market exchange. So it's, it almost kind of doesn't really matter what happens to the commodity after that point. Like, and I think you see this in like a lot of everyday examples where it's like after you buy something, it kind of like doesn't really matter sort of collectively. And there's this idea that you can do anything you want with it because the sort of value in a sense on like a social level has already been realized in terms of the monetary transaction, if I'm like getting that.
Exactly. This is what Gerald brought up about use value. In political economy, you have this use value, which is different from exchange value. But if you take this logic, like, and this is what you're saying, right? In capitalism, it is sort of a disavow. If you analyze it, then from the value theory book that you're reading, you would have to conclude that exchange itself is a kind of use. That by exchanging things, we reproduce society where things are exchanged, and that means it has value. In a sense that by doing an action, you persuade other people to do the same action. That is social value. So exchange is use, but in our economy, in economics and in political economy, these two ideas are separate. Exchange is seen as use-free. You don't use if you exchange. This is what makes it different. And this is David's intervention to show that how you can, if you look from the point of values, how exchange is just a kind of value that we reproduce in society, and how it is the highest level of value, the most transcendent domain. Nika, you still holding?
Yes. So I just wanted to say that, I don't know if you can hear me well, that this is really well illustrated in the art market, because the price or the value of the art piece is set when it's realized or when it's sold. You know, like some artists can claim that when he cost like $200 million, because he can point out that in Sotheby's his picture was once sold for $200 million. And it's very well specifically in the in art market, how absurdic is that, because it's often in the artist is totally undervalued or don't cost anything until a certain moment, and then suddenly it's cost enormous amount of money. And of course, during revolutionary moments, like let's say Paris Commune, Russian Revolution, as an example, they would come back to the value of art that is actually used, and they will change all of these ideas about value. They would say that the art is important and valuable if we produce it collectively, or if it's useful for revolution, or like, you know, if it's useful for humanity, or in some, they will just come up with these different ideas of how value system organized. Yeah, I think art is really perfect for that. And then again, coming to my first question, because art is all about fetishism. It is, in a way, this is the most fetish production in a very different way. So that's really, really important to kind of figure out how it's connected, the value system creation and fetishism and social creativity as well.
I'll leave the fetishism connection to the later, because it's kind of punchline, and what you said with you started with art, right? So art would be an example of social marginal utility theory, right? The value of a thing is whatever you can fetch on the market for it. And if you go completely cynical and try to embrace this theory for what it is, it seems to suffer from the same logic as mode of production. If you take it as face value, then it is impossible to say how non-marketless societies even exist. Like, you would have to think that they're different kind of form of life, because well, they somehow manage their relationships without selling things to each other. And if human is an economical animal, then they are some kind of different animals, or what? Like this market utility approach, just you can't arguing between labor theory of value and marginal utility of value. You can have valid arguments both ways, but none of these actually usable, like, to describe full range of human experiences. And but if you turn it inside out, it kind of starts making sense, because, well, when you sell the art piece, what you're actually doing is the value is a reproduction of the market society. You persuade other people to buy the art pieces by selling art pieces. But it's the same, like if you make a cake and you sell it, and then this cake does like it sells multiple times, and finally it arrives in household. But in household, it still keeps exchanging. It is exchanged from like a grandma to the mom, and mom then feeds it into the kid. So it is a moment when the cake finally fed into the kid, when value actually realized. And the realization of value is you can say that realization of value is a nutrient complex that kid receives. But it wouldn't make sense to spend all this labor to fashion these nutrients into something that looks like a cake, right? It's just wasted labor if you think about it as just food. This food has symbolic purpose. It looks a certain way. It tastes a certain way. It has tradition that we give cakes on these occasions, and there are appropriate people to give these cakes to appropriate people, and so on. And by doing all this in household, you would say that, but when grandma brings a cake to the parents' household and they cut it and feed it into kids, they reproduce the family relation. They reproduce relationship of who feeds and what feeds, right? They reproduce occasion. If it is a birthday or some other kind of celebration, a cake is a kind of way how you acknowledge that we are celebrating something. So you reproduce the celebrations. If you look at all this chain and say, okay, by feeding cake into a kid, you reproduce a relationship between older parents and younger parents, between parents and kids, between relationships and so on, then there is no reason to exclude everything that happened before. When cake the baker sold the cake to the grandma, he also reproduced a relationship of selling cakes. And when baker bought the ingredients for a cake, he also reproduced relationship of buying and selling and so on. So if you look at how important relationship of buying and selling are, like the value of art pieces is an illustration of how important a relationship of exchange for us, even if what we're exchanging has no value at all. Just celebrating the fact that we can establish price by exchange is just something that people want to reproduce in our society for some reason. Doesn't seem very wise, but that's what is happening. So, and yeah, I wanted to go.
Sorry.
Go.
Yeah, I just a little bit confused because I don't understand. Are you saying that the price production is something essential for creating a human relationship? You don't say that, yeah?
Like the price production is one of the human relationships. Like establishing a relationship between buyer and seller is the same as there is a different relationship from, for example, from relationship of command or relationship of romantic engagement or relationship. These are all different relationships, but they are all relationships. And when you enter into relationship of buying and selling, it's a special kind of relationship that you create and immediately destroy. But the act that you repeat this creating and the destruction of buyer-seller relationship is an indication that, first of all, in our society, we see our society as a society where this relationship does exist. as it is important for us to.
But wait, either I misunderstand something or I just disagree with you, because my understanding is the fact that you exchange something with monetary value mean you don't want to do anything. You don't want to do anything with this particular person in the future. It's
Yes.
an end of relationship. It's not a continuation. So that's why we have a human economy, and then we have an alienation economy. And the alienation economy, for example, where banks involved, and the big currency and so on and so forth. So they're not actually acting as a mechanism for producing human relationship, but rather than mechanism that destroying human relationship. If I understand correctly what you say.
You can look at it this way. You can say, and this is what we're going to be looking at next readings and on consumption, a value of destroying, right? Destroying relationships. But if you want to destroy them, you have to create them. You can think about romantic relationships. You create them, then they last, then you destroy them, and they transform into something else. Well, you repeat buying, selling things. You enter into this relationship repeatedly, and the repetition in a human brain is itself seen as an object. By repeatedly entering buying and selling relationship, is like dancing to persuade other people to dance. You buy and sell to persuade other people to buy and sell. You don't establish relationship with people, like lasting relationship.
Wait,
unless
I just want to kind of point out that I disagree. I think like now you keep repeating that, and I realize, so we're talking about capitalism, and we should specify why capitalism is bad, why capitalism is bad for human relationships specifically, that is destroying human relationship and not reproducing them, and that's why capitalism is connected to slavery. And this text that you propose to read is exactly about that, how we think we're like in Soviet school, we were told that we're living in this evolutionary historical line, but actually it's still very much like slavery. I'm sorry, we're talking, it's a Nat who wants to talk, and I'm sorry that I interrupted you.
Go on.
Oh, you should unmute.
This might feed into the conversation you were having, but just something Stas said earlier about you persuade people to sell art pieces by selling art pieces feels like it sort of reminds me of this argument that happens in False Coin about like the difference between these economies of like special objects like heirlooms and then economies of money. And there's this argument that certain, like kinds of, highly valued objects like sort of crowns, or I think it's like, swords in Maori society and that kind of thing, sort of their display kind of persuades others to treat you as a certain kind of person. And it's this sort of like persuasive play, I suppose. And it kind of makes me think of that same, like that, you could say that exchange is something similar happening maybe on an object level where, the exchange of objects, it sounds like what you're saying is sort of, I guess, a persuasive argument or a display to sort of mirror the continuation of those kind of relationships, but with objects sort of standing in between people. Whereas in terms of, certain types of clothing or sacred objects or that kind of thing, it's that happening on like a human level, where it's like a display that indicates the perpetuation of relationships between people versus a display that indicates the perpetuation of that same kind of relationship on the sort of object level.
Yes. It just takes argument 2 steps further, but in a value book, David, first of all, there is assertion that I think shared by all anthropologists. I don't know that because I'm just going from David's books, that all value is about persuasion. The value is basically a minimal unit of political power. And political power is about persuading people to do what you want. But when you think about exchange, David factors two kind of values. One is objects which accumulate history, and objects which accumulate history, heirlooms, sacred stuff, and blah blah, they are valuable because they have history. And then there is money, and money is valuable exactly because they don't have a history. And the logic here, like if I dumb it down exactly for now, because I can't, the entire point of this series to gradually move people closer to this book that you're reading and not dump it on all of a sudden. But argument is that sacred heirlooms, the value of display is a value of persuading people to treat you as you treat yourself. If a person, like, there are basically 5 examples. One of them is a woman. Yeah, Nika, it's fine. Like a woman standing in front of a mirror, and she presents her image. He makes herself look the way she wants to be treated. This is aristocratic mode of value, the mode of value rooted in history. When you want to be treated a certain way, and you put objects on yourself or do some actions which inspire other people to treat you the way someone else was treated before. Whereas money persuades people to acquire things because other people thought to acquire them. It's just a different fantasy, but it is still a persuasion. It's just you persuade to do different things. Okay, so I guess I'll start tilt towards fetishism and my take on how this piece relates to fetishism. First of all, there is this transcendent veil and labor of mourning that people talk, that David talks. I think everyone who read this piece and praise this piece skip on exactly on the passages about mourning and transcendent veils and all that stuff. And I think it's kind of making it much less sharp, I guess, or dangerous. So if you want, like, because value has to be realized in a larger context than it produced, if it's produced in household, it has to be brought out and presented to people beyond household to say that, well, we produce, only then you can say that value being produced when you realized it in more public context. The creation of a public context, or a creation of a domain which has a power to say that, well, by doing this, you realize the value, you actually create a value itself. If there is a place to realize the value, then value must have existed if you realized it. And the places where you can realize the value, these unchanging places, transcendent in relationship to transient, things that there are things which degrade, which are messy, which are almost as like accumulate entropy, against things which stay in the same form forever. One has to make an effort, the labor of persuading everyone else that certain domain has this power to validate the value, to be a place of realization. If you, like, the example with mourning is when mostly women in all communities do the actions, the displays of negating their own self, highlighting their own mortality and their own finitude, to create, to continue the life of a dead person, social life in perpetuity. And then you can have relationship with a dead person in perpetuity, and this dead person can validate that what you do is a good thing. Oh, Michael came. Great. Oh, Michael. So how fetishism enters into it. Fetishism is all about obscuring the place of production, moving it through the transcendent veil and realizing on other side. Like in commodity fetishism, we think that that commodities have powers not just to satisfy our basic material needs. They also have a spiritual power in the kind we can enter into relationship with some commodities. And this power they acquire only because the act of production of commodities is hidden from us by the market. The reproduction of the market, the exchange as use, is that labor that maintains transcendent veil around market and allows this effect when commodities go from factories to households. In the households, they can be seen as possessing spiritual powers. But when David flips it inside out, he basically says, well, it is humans who are produced in the households, then exchanged in the markets, and that allows treating them in the factory as abstract labor. Humans as when it is specifically in capital, this logic that capitalist must be seen as a person who buys abstract human labor and consumes it. So and it's like magical labor, but that you consume and you get more value than you spend in money. But ultimately, if you flip it upside down, you don't need exceptions. You don't need this special treatment for human labor. Human labor becomes just one other commodity that has a power of producing value for same reason why all other commodities have power, because their production of humans is hidden. And association with slavery is that just slavery is produced on a different continent. Is when humans produced on a different continent, then they're sold to the market, which creates this veil of ignorance. Then they are brought into different society, they're taken out of their context. In a new society, they are then can be treated as abstract labor. The people who employ slaves, they first start thinking about this fantasy of abstract labor. And then our industrial capitalism is, for David, is a alliance between financial capitalists who are all about infinite growth and infinite accumulation of wealth, is a financial capitalism fantasy, and abstract labor power is a slavery fantasy. And when they make an alliance, this is how we get our modern capitalism. You can see this essay, Turning Modes of Production Inside Out, as a stepping stone from the theory of value to the Dead Book. In the Dead Book, he expands it more clearly what makes our modern capitalism not equivalent to Roman or Atlantic or some other kind of slavery. It is different. It is very similar, but it is different in the way it sustains itself. It is an alliance between slave mode of production and infinite capital accumulation, which are different fantasies which they can sustain on their own, but you can bring them together, and then you get this necessity for, well, you need to sell your stuff to someone. And slaves are people who can't own things. So you have to then have people change social roles twice a day. You half a day you're a person who produce value, but you don't own it, and then the other half a day you validate this value that you produced. That you yourself as a domain of realization, but you have to go back and forth between the realization wheel. You bake a cake on one side, then go on another side and get a plate with a piece of your cake. And only because you get a plate with a piece of your cake, your labor of producing the cake actually can be seen as having the value. So this is how I see David applying fetishism to this relationship, and saying that, well, we can treat labor as we can treat human as a symbol of value, exactly because we produce humans as commodities. Only by producing humans as commodities, by hiding their place of production and making everything that is done to produce them obscured, only then we can treat humans who work at factories as possessing this magical power of producing value. Gerald?
Hey, one question. Did you say that there's an alliance between a slave mode of production and an infinite value mode of production?
Yeah, it is a very vulgar way to say it, but yes, it is David's argument in that when he expands it. His argument is that, well, why is industrial capitalism in Europe different? The people who produced, who's been doing usury, existed from Sumeria all the way through Middle Ages, but they existed in the pores of societies. They had this fantasy, they always had this fantasy in their head, but they never, this fantasy never dominated. It dominated society in the Roman times. It didn't dominate society before Roman Kingdom, and it didn't dominate society, at least European society, during Middle Ages. But slavery existed regardless of infinite accumulation.
Infinite.
Yes, and in around 1500, David says that the form of corporation is what allows these two ideas to fuse together. The form of corporation, I think, one of the most powerful angles that David has, which I don't think he explored it fully, but the argument is very strong, and he only presents it. He doesn't, well, he refers to other people as if it is already fully explored. I haven't heard it before, and maybe it is explored elsewhere, and David just brings my attention to it, or maybe he just created this argument. I don't know. But from his works, it looks like the form of corporation, what it does, well, its symbolic reproduction mechanism, is most under researched, underdeveloped theory. It's very powerful, and sadly not really paid enough attention.
I found some interesting books about the I'm trying to remember his name, but he's the dean of Tel Aviv School of Law, and he's doing some really interesting research about the history of the commenda as a precursor to the modern corporation, and as actual technology to separate risk from the operators of an enterprise from the sponsors of the enterprise. And he sees that as a technological innovation led by patterns of trade through the eastern part of the African continent and the southern Indian Ocean, centered around Mecca.
Well, okay, we had a reading group about Michael Hudson, Fall of Antiquity, and this is a three-book series where he traces exactly this question, but he traces it to the origin of Sumeria. He traces it back to when we first learned about logic of interest, and the last discussion we had with Michael Hudson, I specifically challenged him on this moment that why do we even need interest? His answer was very simple. Interest calculation is just a mode of sharing in the profit. Sharing in the profit implies sharing in the risk originally. It was created as a means of sharing in profit and sharing in risk in Sumeria. It is when it was transferred from Sumeria into Hellenistic Aegean Sea after Greek Dark Ages in 800 BC or 700 BC. Then this idea became sharing in profit without sharing in risk as a way of controlling risk. And then, yes, then you find this system of interest rate as insurance, where you have, like, for example, ship of Theseus, right? A captain takes a loan, and he goes to do a trade, and then he comes back, and if he succeeded his trade, he has to pay his loan. But if his ship sunk in the process, and he arrived on a different ship, then he doesn't have to pay his loan. And then it becomes a long philosophical debate, like how much of a ship you have to replace so that you're still on the same ship, because captains were actually trying to play the insurance to down their ships and don't to not pay the loan.
Maybe we could just go back though to this idea of a contrast between, maybe you could just clarify, when you use the word infinite accumulation, is that referring to like a fetish, like a social fetish, or is it referring to a mode of production that a group of people organize themselves around? I'm just curious what you mean by infinite accumulation and how that relates to the idea of slavery.
Both. There are two ways to analyze capitalism. To ask a question, what capitalism is, what makes it different from everything else. One way to analyze it is to say that capitalism is a fantasy of infinite growth of economic value or whatever, right? The definition.
This idea of capitalism as this idea of infinite growth.
Yes, the capital is self-increasing value. The definition of capital in this school, in Marxian school, is a self-increasing value.
This is according to Marx himself?
I think yes. It may be coming from Smith. That I may not be, like, Marx uses this logic. I don't know if he invented it or if this is something that he picked from Smith, but it goes back to way before Smith. It probably goes back to, like, David gives examples
Well,
of
Ricardo was
this.
before Smith, I believe.
No, I think it's the same, but I think Ricardo expands on the Smith. I could be wrong. So this is one way to analyze capitalism, to say that capitalism is a mode of production where we pursue profit, and the profit is infinite growth, right? Corporations must keep growing, otherwise they die.
It
The
might be
other way,
it might be Cantillon as well, possibly.
what's continuing?
The Frenchman. I'm referring to people earlier than Marx that Marx may have been in dialogue with.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That is where I'm just may not be informed enough about history. But
Well, actually,
there is another.
not to derail, but I think that's why it's important to kind of obviously Sumeria, has a big gap until we start to get into more the modern era of the 1500s or the 1400s. And I might be referencing and mixing up the dean of Tel Aviv with somebody named Benedict Kohler, who also talks a lot about the history of sea trade between the Mediterranean, and then linking it with geography. Some of the innovations in recognition of that history were based on geography of certain ports, certain types of ships, and certain technological research that really makes it a much more salient, because we can actually get into the insurance contracts, the pricing, we have data, we can actually kind of come to more of a sense of a scientific sense of the commodity theory of value, its rise, its popularity, maybe even linking it to this idea of infinite accumulation, of infinite growth. Because I think that's kind of a modern, obviously we have the dialogue with the word slavery. And I've heard you mention a couple times to talk about the Americas procurement of West African labor for the sugar industry. But I think it's also important to add to the dialogue a discussion that the revolution in the eastern part, the sort of central part of Europe, especially for Russian peasants, happened about 50 years after the Civil War in the United States. And in terms of a transformation using the commodity theory of value, the transformation of labor becomes the sort of the pivot point of which everything hinges around. It's a transformation of humans to the ultimate value, or to the ultimate commodity. And the just one piece of data is that the IRS was formed in the wake of the US Civil War simply because there were so many Black Southerners who were officially labeled as slaves, but actually fought on behalf of the Confederacy because they recognized that they were creating their own corporations as plantations, and they were business owners, and they were participants in an economic model that clearly, as the result of the IRS being formed in the wake of the Civil War, was a way to nationalize this and tax these income transactions that were being done privately amongst cooperating participants. So I hope that's not derailing it, but I just thought it'd be a good thing to add in because that happened about 50 years before the October Revolution. And as somebody with Slavic background, I think that's really lost in a lot of American discussions about this issue. I don't know. I know a lot of us are global, but just as somebody, as an American, I think we forget our Slavic, ancestors.
Oh, that's a lot. Well, I won't be commenting on American. I don't have enough background in all the stakes that and transformations that happened in Americans. In Russia, at least, we trace the origin of revolution more to Napoleon, because well, I won't be rehearsing the War and Peace here, but it roots in a different event. Maybe the transformation may be the same that you're implying, but inciting event is different. Okay, so what you said about insurance, I think we can agree that if the practice of insurance can be found in Sumeria, then it would be safe to say that Greeks did not invent the logic, right? They adopted it for maritime trade because Sumerians weren't doing much of maritime trade. And it started including a lot of moral, like it became different kind of trade. Mediterranean trade was between more of a different parties involved. There are Phoenicians, Carthaginians, all the kind of Aegean islands. They're more equal, I guess, than when Sumeria sends trading expeditions to Iranian barbarians. It's a different kind of relationship. So social forms have transformed, but I think we can safely assume that logic of insurance was invented in Sumeria. We started with a relationship of infinite accumulation and slavery, and that I think that David's argument that relationship, these are two different practices, which don't necessarily have to enter into relationship. The infinite accumulation is a fantasy that when you put value into something, it grows. It's a fantasy that you plant some food and you get more food than you planted. You have cattle which multiplies itself. And then you start thinking about the moment you invent the usury, you start thinking about money as a thing that can multiply kind of like cattle. You just need to put it into fertile ground. And the fertile ground is a people. You put money into people and they just grow inside people, kind of like grass grows inside a fertile land. Or like humans grow inside the women's if you put little women's in little humans in women's, they grow inside, right? This is a fantasy of infinite growth. In the fantasy of slavery is a fantasy of abstract labor, which isn't necessarily associated with growth. It's just the way you organize like large construction projects and basically division of labor. They exist and take more or less prevalent forms in different points in time. In Roman time, and they act together. Then Christian tradition suppresses usury a lot and bans chattel slavery. So you don't get a lot of, like you still have slaves, you don't get a lot of slaves in a society. And that means the public perception, the value of having slaves around is less important to society. See, it is okay to take slaves like from Africa and put them in America, so long as you don't bring them to Europe. They're okay with it, right? And then when these two ideas fuse, and like, can we bring slaves back to Europe? No, we can't, because we don't want slaves in Europe. But we kind of want to organize production in something in a similar way, and then the form of corporation kind of solves this problem. Entire ethical part of the debt book is about how David shows that debt, and usury specifically as a system of creation of debt, has a moral power rival to the Christian God. He basically says that Christianity was banned usually because it recognized spiritual power of that rivals Christianity, and therefore had to suppress it, as a spiritual rival, as a relationship that is at least as powerful in its ability to persuade people actions as love of God.
Well, and it's interesting that Benedict Kohler talks about the marshy, low-lying areas as being places where outpost traders in the northern Mediterranean could interact with areas that were otherwise controlled by the Christian church, but they were beginning to have sort of undercover of darkness, undercover of marshy areas. They could have secret outposts for trading with long distance trading routes that would originate in marshy areas that were very difficult to govern.
Yeah. Okay, so we're running up for time. What do people want? Do people want to ask questions? Do we wrap it up here?
Well, I would just add that if anybody's,
Go.
I know I'm appreciative when we get to the commodity theory of value. I think that's a popular topic for today's kind of discourse. And I would just add, I posted a couple of links, but Marx talks about the commodity theory of value in the context of the transformation of labor into commodities themselves, and that this modern discussion about what some people call the transformation problem or the transformation of labor is something that Anwar Sheikh has lectured about extensively. It's very helpful to kind of understand how the normalization of profits across industries helps us kind of untangle the role of profit on capital versus the role of profit on labor, and sort of helps one have a discussion or an understanding of how those returns on capital interact with the exchange of labor, that a lot of us participate.
There are many people who try to weigh in on the topic. First of all, yes, Marx isn't talking about anything like commodity theory of value. His theory of value is famously known as labor theory of value, which he didn't create, but he popularized it. And the transformation problem and normalization of profit connects back to the lack of distinction fake distinction between use value and exchange value. Only then, they act, or they speak as if these are different things, and this is where transformation problem arises. But if you actually collapse them, then transformation problem disappears. But what is also disappears if you collapse them is what Marx wanted to argue very much, that value isn't produced by machines. Machines accumulate value produced by people and then redistributed it. And if you collapse exchange and use value, then one has to argue that all factors of production can add value. And if you're interested in following that, I would suggest Steve Keen. He wrote the thesis on transformation problem, but in a very different way than everyone else does. And he actually recognizes this argument, but from his own economic point of view. He actually says that Marx made a mistake in in dialectics, then Marx recognized the mistake, but refused to own it. So that's Steve Keen's argument. I can't really go there, and specifically, I can't go there here. This group is basically an attempt to establish identity between what we call values and what we call economic value, and how economic value is a kind of valueless thing. So it is. I'm hostile to economics in this group, and therefore anything that we call commodity is under suspicion. But okay. If we are closing this, then I will just announce that next thing that I want to do is David's essay on the very idea of consumption, which touches on how we find it is spiritually important. It is our value to think of owning and destroying things, and how you cannot really imagine full ownership without destruction. Our idea of property seems to encode the idea of destruction, of using up, of consuming. And this is a very interesting argument. It also touches on fetishism, but doesn't mention fetishism specifically. So I'll be trying to find how to build this connection and maybe imagine it. Yeah, so until next time.
Thank you so much, Stas. And I just want to say that for the next time, you should remind me, I can give you the lecture of David about property, where exactly he's explaining what you said now. So we can also send it around, and you can build your argument on this text.
As illustration, cool.
Yeah, it wasn't published, so maybe it will be a treat. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Stas.
Yeah, see you.